13 Hollywood legends who lit up the screen and were slowly destroyed by the very smoke that surrounded them. Behind their fame, cigarettes became both a companion and a curse. Stay with us, because by the end of this story, you'll see how even the brightest stars couldn't escape the haze of their own habits. Number 1. Steve McQueen. On the 7th of November in the year 1980, the man once called the King of Cool died in a hospital in Ciudad Juarez, Mexico. He was only 50 years old. The cause was mesothelioma, a rare and aggressive cancer often linked to asbestos exposure, but his decades of heavy smoking had worsened every breath he took. In his final months, his lean frame had wasted away, a haunting contrast to the fearless racer and rebel the world remembered. McQueen's decline began quietly. Between film shoots, he smoked constantly, sometimes 2 or 3 packs a day, the cigarette almost part of his expression. His rugged voice, his squint, his entire image seemed carved out of smoke. During the filming of The Sand, Pebbles, and Bullet, clouds of tobacco hung around the set. He once joked that he could not deliver a line without lighting up first. Those cigarettes became the silent rhythm of his days, each puff a pause between moments of motion and adrenaline. By the late 1970s, his health began to fail. The tough exterior that had made him a global icon hit a man in constant pain. Doctors found tumors in his lungs and abdomen. Despite the diagnosis, McQueen searched for unconventional treatments, hoping to survive through sheer willpower. In desperation, he traveled to Mexico for an experimental surgery that American doctors had refused to perform. The procedure removed large tumors, but the damage to his body was beyond repair. Hours later, his heart stopped. The news stunned Hollywood. Fans who had grown up watching him outrun enemies and defy death could hardly accept that he was gone. His story became another warning about the price of invincibility. McQueen had lived as though limits did not exist, racing cars, flying planes, and taking risks that thrilled millions. Yet in the end, it was something as small and ordinary as a cigarette that stole his breath away. Even now, when his films play late at night, you can still see the glint in his eyes, the swagger, the cigarette balanced between his fingers. It is part of the legend, inseparable from his charm and his tragedy, a reminder that even the coolest man in Hollywood could not escape the fire he carried within. Number 2. Clark Gable. On the 16th of November in the year 1960, the world awoke to the news that the King of Hollywood had died at a hospital in Los Angeles. He was 59 years old. The cause was a massive heart attack, one that ended the life of a man whose image defined an entire generation of American cinema. For years, Clark Gable had lived with a cigarette in his hand, a quiet ritual that followed him through every film set, dressing room, and interview. Those cigarettes became part of his identity, as inseparable from him as his mustache and his effortless charm. During the filming of The Misfits, his final movie, the long days under the Nevada sun took a toll on his health. He performed his own stunts, refusing to use doubles, insisting that audiences expected him to be strong, daring, and real. Between takes, he lit one cigarette after another, often joking that it kept him calm. Behind the humor was exhaustion. The heavy workload, the desert heat, and years of tobacco had weakened his heart. Shortly after finishing the film, he collapsed at home. 10 days later, he was gone. Hollywood stood still. The man who had once told Scarlett O'Hara that he frankly did not give a damn had become a symbol of masculine grace, charm, and resilience. Reporters flooded the hospital gates, while his fans mourned across the country. His wife, actress Kay Williams, was pregnant with their son at the time of his death, a child who would grow up never knowing the father whose face had graced countless movie posters. Those who knew Gable spoke of a man of contradictions. He was confident yet humble, proud yet gentle, a star who never quite believed he deserved his fame. He had fought in World War II, returned to rebuild his career, and carried within him a quiet discipline shaped by hardship. But his loyalty to cigarettes never wavered. In a world of glamour and control, they were the one habit he never conquered. When his movies play today, his image still blazes with vitality. Yet behind that grin lies the shadow of the habit that outlived him. Do you remember the first time you saw Clark Gable on screen? Share your memory in the comments below. Number 3. Mickey Rooney. On the 6th of April in the year 2014, the news of his death spread quietly across Hollywood. He was 93 years old. The official cause was natural causes, but those close to him knew his lungs had suffered from decades of heavy smoking and stress that shadowed his long and turbulent life. He was one of the last surviving stars from the golden age of cinema, a man whose career spanned more than 8 decades, yet whose final years were marked by frailty and financial hardship. Rooney had begun smoking as a teenager during the early days of his fame. It was the 1930s, and nearly everyone in Hollywood smoked. The studios encouraged it, believing it added sophistication and style. By the time he became a household name with the Andy Hardy films, the cigarette had already become part of his image. Between takes, he could often be seen puffing in the corner, joking with crew members, or lost in thought beneath a cloud of smoke. As he grew older, his fame began to fade, but his habits did not. The endless pressure of fame, failed marriages, and career disappointments drove him deeper into stress and exhaustion. Smoking was his quiet escape, a way to steady his nerves between stage performances and film roles. Friends said he could go through several packs a day, his fingers stained with nicotine, his laugh growing hoarser each year. He often ignored doctors' warnings, insisting that the habit had become too much a part of who he was to stop. In his later years, his small frame had grown frail, his once vibrant energy dulled by illness. Yet even then, he continued to work, appearing in films and television roles that paid tribute to his long history in the industry. Despite failing health, he never lost his humor or his spark. He would joke that he had outlived nearly everyone he ever knew, and perhaps he was right. But each breath had become harder, each movement slower, his lungs carrying the toll of a lifetime of smoke. When Mickey Rooney finally passed away, Hollywood mourned not only a performer but an entire era. His story remains one of brilliance, shadowed by self-destruction, a reminder of how even boundless talent can be worn down by the quiet poison of habit. Number 4. Richard Attenborough. On the 24th of August in the year 2014, the world lost one of its most respected actors and directors. He was 90 years old. The cause of death was heart failure, worsened by years of declining health and respiratory problems linked to a lifetime of smoking. For decades, Richard Attenborough had lived surrounded by film sets, scripts, and cigarette smoke, each a symbol of the creative fire that defined his long and remarkable career. He had started smoking during his early days on stage in London, when long rehearsals and cold theaters made cigarettes a comfort and a companion. By the time he moved into film, the habit had become inseparable from his persona. Behind the camera, he was rarely seen without a cigarette in hand, the tip glowing softly as he discussed lighting, camera angles, or performances. Those who worked with him often joked that smoke followed him like a loyal shadow, curling in the air as he built the worlds that audiences would later admire. His breakthrough came in the 1940s and 50s, with roles that captured both charm and intensity. Later, as a director, he created powerful films such as Gandhi and A Bridge Too Far, works that earned him international acclaim and awards. Yet as his reputation grew, so did the toll on his health. Long nights in editing rooms, constant travel, and endless cups of coffee paired with cigarettes eroded his strength. By his later years, he suffered repeated illnesses that left him weak and dependent on care. Even after retirement, he remained active in the arts, giving interviews and mentoring young filmmakers. His voice, once firm and resonant, had grown softer, occasionally interrupted by coughing fits that betrayed the damage to his lungs. In private, he expressed regret for the habit that had followed him through every success. Friends recalled him speaking of how easily the glamour of youth had disguised the danger, how the industry had once celebrated smoking as part of the artist's identity. When he passed away, tributes poured in from across the world. His films continued to inspire, his work living on even as the man himself succumbed to the years of wear that smoke had left behind. His story stands as both triumph and warning, the mark of a life brilliant yet fragile beneath the haze of memory. Number 5. George Campbell Scott. On the 22nd of September in the year 1999, George C. Scott died in his Westlake Village home in California. He was 71 years old. The cause of death was a ruptured abdominal aneurysm, but the years of heavy smoking had left his body fragile, his lungs weakened, and his breathing labored. For a man whose voice once roared across the screen as General Patton, his final years were marked by silence and exhaustion. Throughout his career, cigarettes had been as much a part of his identity as his commanding presence. During rehearsals, interviews, or quiet moments between takes, he could always be seen with one in hand. The smoke curled around him like a storm, fitting for a man known for his intensity. Colleagues said he would sometimes go through several packs in a single day, pacing backstage or on set as he worked through the emotions of a scene. To him, smoking was both ritual and release, the pause between explosions of energy. By the 1980s, the effects began to show. His once booming voice grew rough, and he tired easily during long shoots. Doctors warned him about the damage, urging him to quit, but he brushed off their concern. He claimed that cigarettes kept him grounded, a strange comfort amid the chaos of fame. The stubbornness that made him a great actor also made him defiant toward his own body's limits. Each performance came with more pain, each breath with more struggle. Despite his failing health, he continued to work, drawn by a need to perform. In films and television, he carried the same power that had defined his youth, even as age and illness shadowed his frame. When he finally died, the industry mourned the loss of one of its fiercest talents, a man who had brought raw humanity to every role. In later tributes, friends remembered the cigarette always between his fingers, glowing faintly in the dark of a studio. That image, both iconic and tragic, seemed to sum up his life, a man driven by passion, undone by habit. Do you remember your favorite performance by George C. Scott? Tell us in the comments which role left the deepest mark on you. Number 6. Brian Keith. On the 24th of June in the year 1997, Brian Keith was found dead in his Malibu home. He was 75 years old. The cause was a self-inflicted gunshot wound, ending a life marked by both professional triumph and personal pain. In the months before his death, he had been battling lung cancer and emphysema, diseases that had left him struggling for every breath. The years of heavy smoking that once seemed harmless on set had finally closed in on him, taking away his voice, his energy, and eventually, his will to keep fighting. Keith had built a long and respected career in Hollywood. Known for his deep voice and calm authority, he appeared in films and television series that spanned more than 5 decades. From his beloved role in Family Affair to his work in The Parent Trap, he became the image of strength and fatherly warmth. Off camera, however, his life was far more fragile. Cigarettes had followed him since his youth, a habit picked up during his service as a Marine in World War II and carried through the long nights of production. As his fame grew, so did the strain on his body. He often smoked during interviews, on film sets, and even in his dressing room, a ritual that calmed him in moments of stress. Friends and family pleaded with him to quit, but he would only smile and say that old habits died hard. In the end, those habits began to erode his health. By the mid-1990s, he suffered from chronic pain, labored breathing, and fatigue. The cancer that developed in his lungs spread rapidly, and his condition worsened with each passing month. His final years were shadowed by loss. Only 2 months before his death, his daughter Daisy, also an actress, had taken her own life. Her passing left him heartbroken, and those close to him said he never recovered from the grief. The illness, the sorrow, and the exhaustion combined into a quiet despair that no one could reach. When news of his death broke, the industry mourned deeply. He had been a symbol of steady masculinity, of quiet compassion, of the kind of performer who carried weight without words. Yet beneath that strength lay a man undone by the same smoke that had once filled his performances with timeless, rugged charm. Number 7. Bea Arthur. On the 25th of April in the year 2009, Bea Arthur died peacefully at her home in Los Angeles. She was 86 years old. The cause of death was lung cancer, a condition she had kept private until her final months. Her passing came as a shock to fans who had known her as strong, sharp-witted, and indestructible. For decades, she had been a towering presence in American television, but behind that confidence was a long struggle with the quiet toll of smoking. Arthur had begun smoking early in her career, during her days in the theater. In the backstage haze of cigarettes and makeup lights, she found the habit comforting. Many performers smoked then, believing it calmed their nerves and gave their voices a richer tone. When she moved to television, the habit followed. During rehearsals and breaks, she was rarely seen without a cigarette, her long fingers holding it delicately as she traded jokes with castmates. It became part of her image off camera, though she was careful never to show it publicly in her later years. Her voice, deep and distinctive, became one of her greatest trademarks. It carried authority and warmth in equal measure. Yet those who knew her well noticed the growing rasp as she aged. By the late 1990s, she had suffered repeated bouts of bronchitis and fatigue. Doctors warned her that her lungs were severely damaged, but she kept her illness to herself. She had always been private about personal matters, and even close friends were unaware of how much she was suffering. In her final years, she withdrew quietly from public life. She devoted her time to animal welfare and spent her days surrounded by family and close companions. Her sharp humor remained until the end, even as her health declined. When she died, tributes poured in from across the world. Fans remembered Dorothy Zbornak from The Golden Girls, the tough woman with the soft heart, never realizing how real that strength had been in her final battle. B. Arthur's story stands as one of grace under quiet suffering. The laughter she brought to millions was genuine, even as each breath became harder to take. The smoke that once filled the stage lights had long faded, but her voice still lingers, strong and unforgettable. Number 8. Jack Albertson. On the 25th of November, in the year 1981, Jack Albertson died at his home in Los Angeles after a long battle with colon cancer that had spread to his lungs. He was 74 years old. For 3 years, he had kept his illness secret, continuing to work even as the disease weakened his body. The man who had made audiences laugh in Chico and the man in Cry in The Subject Was Roses left behind a legacy of warmth, wit, and quiet courage. Albertson had been a smoker for most of his life. From the early days of vaudeville to the height of his film and television career, he was rarely seen without a cigarette. On set, between takes, he would light one with practiced ease, letting the smoke curl around him as he ran through lines or joked with the crew. It was an ordinary habit in those days, a sign of sophistication and calm. Over time, it became part of his rhythm, something that accompanied both his work and his rest. By the late 1970s, his health began to decline. He suffered from persistent coughing and fatigue, but he brushed it off, attributing it to age and long hours. When doctors diagnosed him with cancer, he continued to perform, unwilling to let illness define his final years. Even as his strength faded, he appeared in stage productions and television roles, his professionalism never wavering. Those who worked with him said he never complained, never sought sympathy, and always arrived on time, cigarette in hand, ready to deliver. As the disease spread, breathing became more difficult. The same lungs that had once powered his booming stage voice were failing. Yet Albertson refused to retire. He completed his last performances with quiet dignity, insisting that he would rather die working than give in to sickness. When he finally passed away, the world remembered not only his humor but also his humanity. He was the everyman, the familiar face that could make laughter feel like comfort. His story remains a testament to the strength of spirit hidden behind gentle smiles and weary lungs. Which of Jack Albertson's performances do you remember most vividly? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Number 9. Fred MacMurray. On the 5th of November in the year 1991, Fred MacMurray died at his home in Santa Monica, California. He was 83 years old. The cause was pneumonia, but his health had been in decline for years due to throat cancer and chronic respiratory problems linked to a lifetime of smoking. The man who had once embodied the image of the ideal American father had spent his final years quietly, far from the lights that had defined his long and steady career. McMurray had started smoking early, during his years as a musician and band performer before Hollywood found him. In those days, the habit was part of the culture, something that filled the pauses between sets and rehearsals. By the time he rose to fame in the 1930s, cigarettes had become an inseparable part of his routine. He was often seen on set with a pipe or a cigarette, a familiar prop that seemed to complement his calm and thoughtful demeanor. His screen image was clean and wholesome, yet off-camera, his health began to pay the price of constant exposure to tobacco smoke. The years of inhaling deeply through long days of filming slowly wore down his throat and lungs. By the late 1970s, he had developed severe respiratory issues. Doctors diagnosed throat cancer, forcing him to undergo multiple treatments that left his voice weaker and his energy low. Despite the illness, McMurray maintained his characteristic optimism. He withdrew from acting and focused on his family and his ranch, tending to the land he loved. Friends said he remained cheerful, polite, and grateful, never one to complain about pain or limitation. He had always been known for his quiet discipline, both as an actor and as a man. When he died, tributes poured in, celebrating not only his work but his dignity. Audiences remembered him as the charming husband in Double Indemnity, the devoted father in My Three Sons, and the kind soul who seemed immune to the darkness that often haunted Hollywood. His story ended far from scandal or noise, yet beneath that peaceful surface was the long, invisible damage left by smoke. The same calm smile that had comforted millions had hidden years of struggle against the air he once breathed so easily. Number 10. Phil Harris. On the 11th of August in the year 1995, Phil Harris passed away in Rancho Mirage, California. He was 89 years old. The cause was a heart attack, but those close to him knew that years of heavy smoking had weakened his lungs and heart long before that day. He had been a man of charm and rhythm, his voice carrying across radio waves, nightclubs, and film screens for more than half a century. Harris was a product of a different era, one where smoke filled every studio and bar. He began smoking as a young musician, long before fame arrived. In the jazz clubs where he performed, cigarettes were part of the atmosphere, as natural as the sound of trumpets or laughter. When he transitioned to radio and film, the habit followed him. Between broadcasts, he could often be found with a cigarette dangling from his lips, joking with the band or timing his next cue, with the slow curl of smoke drifting upward. By the 1950s, Harris had become one of America's most familiar voices. As the cheerful bandleader and radio star, he embodied the easy confidence of mid-century entertainment. Later, he lent that same voice to Disney characters, including Baloo the bear in The Jungle Book, whose warm humor mirrored his own. Yet behind that rich, steady tone were lungs that had carried decades of nicotine. Each recording session became a little harder, each breath a little shorter. In his later years, Harris suffered repeated health issues related to his heart and breathing. Doctors urged him to give up smoking, but the habit had been with him too long. He would often joke that quitting would only make him nervous. By then, his public appearances had become rare, his once booming laughter replaced by long silences and quiet reflection. When he died, the entertainment world mourned the loss of a man whose voice had defined an age of radio and animation. Fans remembered him not only for his talent but for his warmth and humor, qualities that no illness could ever erase. The music, the laughter, and the lingering haze of cigarette smoke remain forever tied to his memory, like the echo of a song that never truly ends. Number 11. Gene Tierney. On the 6th of November in the year 1991, Gene Tierney died in Houston, Texas. She was 70 years old. The cause was emphysema, the result of decades of heavy smoking that had quietly stolen her breath long before her final day. Once one of the most radiant stars of Hollywood's golden age, she had spent her later years in frail health, her luminous voice reduced to a whisper. Tierney began smoking in her early 20s, when she entered the studio system and was molded into a star. In that era, cigarettes were part of the image. Directors and photographers encouraged her to hold one between her fingers, believing it gave her elegance and mystery. She followed the habit without question, never imagining that it would one day define her decline. Her beauty was striking, her presence magnetic, and for a time she seemed untouchable. Through the 1940s, Tierney became a symbol of grace and sophistication. Films like Laura and Leave Her to Heaven made her a household name, admired for her poise and expressive depth. Yet fame came with strain. The pressures of publicity, personal heartbreak, and studio control left her seeking comfort in small rituals, and smoking became her constant companion. Even during filming, she would retreat between takes for a quick puff, the smoke blending into the fog of the soundstage. By the 1950s, her health began to deteriorate. She suffered from exhaustion and mental illness, spending time in treatment and later retreating from the industry. The cigarettes never left her hand, even in recovery. Over the years, emphysema took hold. Her lungs weakened, her movements slowed, and her once powerful voice faded to breathless softness. Despite her illness, she remained gracious, speaking openly about her struggles and reminding others that fame offered no shield against pain. In her final years, she lived quietly in Texas with her family, surrounded by memories of a career that had dazzled millions. When she passed away, tributes poured in from across the world, remembering not only her beauty but her courage. Jean Tierney's story remains a portrait of both brilliance and fragility, the glow of stardom dimmed by the smoke that once made it shimmer. Number 12, Robert Prosky. On the 8th of December in the year 2008, Robert Prosky died in Washington, D.C. He was 77 years old. The cause of death was complications following heart surgery, but his lungs and circulation had long been weakened by decades of heavy smoking. The gentle voice and expressive eyes that had made him one of Hollywood's most respected character actors were silenced after more than half a century of storytelling on stage and screen. Prosky's life and performance began in the theater, where he spent years shaping his craft before Hollywood ever noticed him. Like many stage actors of his generation, he picked up smoking early, when cigarettes were as common backstage as scripts and coffee cups. He often said that the smoke helped him think, a small comfort in the hours of rehearsal and waiting between scenes. By the time he began appearing in films in the late 1970s, the habit had become inseparable from his routine. Audiences came to know him through roles that carried quiet strength and humanity. In movies such as Thief, Christine, and Dead Poets Society, he brought warmth and depth to every character he touched. His presence was never flashy, yet always memorable. Behind the scenes, however, the constant smoking began to erode his health. Friends recalled him stepping outside during breaks, lighting one cigarette after another, while discussing lines or sharing stories from the stage. By the early 2000s, the effects of long-term smoking had caught up with him. His breathing had grown labored, and he struggled with fatigue. Doctors urged him to stop, but the habit was ingrained, a lifelong companion that had followed him through every act of his career. When heart problems emerged, surgery was his only option. Though he approached it with optimism, his weakened body could not recover. His passing left a deep absence among those who had worked with him. Fellow actors remembered his humility, his mentorship, and his ability to bring sincerity to even the smallest roles. Robert Prosky's story is one of dedication and quiet brilliance, a man who gave everything to his craft while quietly carrying the scars of a habit that shadowed an entire generation of performers. Number 13, Dan Dailey. On the 16th of October in the year 1978, Dan Dailey died at a hospital in Los Angeles. He was 63 years old. The cause of death was complications following hip surgery and chronic anemia, worsened by years of heavy smoking and exhaustion. His passing marked the end of a performer who had once brought joy, movement, and charm to Hollywood's most dazzling musicals. Dailey's career had begun in the golden age of song and dance. With a tall frame and an effortless smile, he became one of the most beloved entertainers of the 1940s and 50s. On stage and on screen, he moved with ease, his voice warm and full of humor. Yet behind that vitality was a private struggle with stress, insomnia, and dependence on cigarettes that followed him from studio to studio. He often joked that he could not rehearse a scene without lighting up first, the smoke drifting through the rehearsal halls like a familiar companion. The entertainment industry of his era thrived on energy, and daily gave more than most. Long hours, relentless touring, and the constant pressure to stay relevant took a toll on his health. By the mid-1970s, his once strong voice had grown hoarse, his breathing shallow, and his energy limited. Doctors diagnosed a series of ailments connected to his lungs and circulation, all aggravated by years of smoking. Even as his body weakened, he continued to work, appearing in television roles and small stage productions, determined to keep performing until the end. Those who knew him spoke of kindness and generosity. He mentored younger actors, offering encouragement and humor even as his own strength faded. The cheerful image audiences remembered from the screen was not an illusion. It was the reflection of a man who believed in giving joy, even when pain shadowed his every step. When Dan Dailey passed away, the world of entertainment lost one of its last great musical gentlemen. His songs and dances live on, echoing the golden years of Hollywood when elegance met effort, and lighthearted laughter often hid deep fatigue. Thank you for watching and keeping these memories alive. If you love stories of the legends who shaped Hollywood, do not forget to subscribe for more timeless tributes. See you in the next episode.